I just don't get it. I'm not sure if this is a cash grab by CGC on reholder fees, or if their goal is to legitimately isolate their existing collector base. It just doesn't make sense to me. Hey everybody, what's up from Pokemon Classics, reminding you that the classics never go out of style. The subject of today's video is what is going on with these grading companies. There's a major news announcement, news release from CGC Grading, and we're going to break that down in detail. Now, it's not just CGC though. Recently, BGS announced a major grading change of their own, which ultimately ended in failure, so there may be a cautionary tale there back to CGC. Finally, we'll also check in with PSA Grading, which has its own unique set of changes happening with their service. But anyway, let's roll into some of these trends. Now, before we dive into the news individually for these grading companies, I thought it would first be advantageous to take a look at some of these charts, looking at the larger fight for market share that seems to be unfolding for a lot of these grading companies. Now, obviously, PSA has a significant advantage. They are the OG player in the Pokemon space, and in terms of volume, they outnumber many of these other grading companies by a scale of about 10-1. Now, to be fair, the graphs that you're seeing here aren't necessarily representative of just Pokemon. These are including all cards that are graded through those companies, including sports cards. However, if we take a look at Pokemon-specific grading data, which I only have from fall of 2022 through the website TCG Fish, which has been down for maintenance for a while since then, so the data is a little bit outdated, but we can see that that trend bears out for Pokemon specifically, where PSA is enjoying that massive dominance over these other grading companies. One of the things that I think we're seeing in a more macro level, though, is this strategic maneuvering by a number of different companies as we're entering this lower phase of growth, this consolidation phase. We're seeing a lower volume of cards submitted across the board, while at the same time, there's more competition by these grading companies to earn those card submissions. Naturally, higher overhead costs for companies due to inflation, due to upscaling services with more staffing, more infrastructure in place. And I think what we're ultimately seeing is a little bit of desperation from some of those lesser volume companies, leading them to make some rather drastic changes to their policies and their grading tiers. And that'll bring us to CGC, who hit us this morning with a major announcement. Now, CGC is merging with CSG Grading. They're two companies as part of the same parent company, and this has spawned two massive changes for CGC moving forward. One of those changes is a revamped grading scale and grading system. The other is cosmetic, as we're looking at new card labels. Gone forever are the iconic blue labels, which I know have had mixed opinions. Personally, I love this new label. I think it looks really clean, and I've always been a fan of the CGC case. I think it's probably the best case out there on the market. But where I have the real problem comes with the new grading scale and some of the policies being implemented. Now, I'm going to do my best to summarize a lot of information, but essentially CGC will be sunsetting perfect 10s. Previously, they had a pristine 10 and a perfect 10, the perfect 10 with all 10 subgrades, the pristine 10 a little less difficult to attain. And now they'll still be offering two types of 10s, but now the pristine 10 is the new perfect 10, and a gem mint 10 is also added to the equation. I know that sounds confusing. It's going to be confusing for a lot of people, but simply put, it'll look like this. No longer will CGC have 9.5 grades on their grading scale. They're kind of doing away with that, following in the footsteps of PSA, where it goes from 9 up to 10, but then they'll have an extra level of 10 for the best of the best, titled a pristine 10. One of the things that come along with this announcement is that any of the existing graded 9.5s can be sent in to CGC and reholdered as a CGC 10. So, poof, the magic wand is waved and a 9.5 is now the equivalent of a 10. Also, they announced that there'll be no more subgrades, and I believe they attributed this due to a lack of interest. Now, I'm not really a CGC submitter myself. I'm really more of a PSA purist, but I know a number of people out there really appreciated having subgrades, and that was one of the distinct things that was unique about CGC cards, is having the ability to further classify condition with those subgrades, looking at centering, looking at surface wear, looking at edges and corners. And so I know a lot of people have been negatively turned off by that announcement. As I already mentioned, I'm really not a CGC collector, but I do think that's one of the major issues that stems from this announcement is the lack of consistency, both for collectors as well as in terms of conditions and grading scales. Looking at collectors, I can tell you from experience that collectors value having consistency in their collection, whether it's a specific grading company that they want to have all of their slabs with, or even having a consistency in the numerical grades or the label itself. And although PSA has done this as well, changing up their label a bit in the past, adding a holographic emblem or logo for security purposes, it's never been anything on this magnitude of changing the color, changing the style, changing the layout, and even changing the condition scale. And that's where the bigger problem lies, at least I think, is that lack of consistency with grading. 9.5s are no longer a thing, and all 9.5s that exist can be upgraded to 10s. And perfect 10s don't exist at all, so those are some pretty significant changes. CGC had this issue before with consistency in terms of grading. And I don't know if you guys remember back, it was a while ago, but it seemed that CGC was gatekeeping 10s early on and making it extremely difficult to earn a 10 on a card submitted to them. Even non-holographic cards, even ones that were pack fresh. And after population reports were released and CGC admitted to changing their way of grading, there was a massive explosion in 10s. And this was very controversial at the time, and it hurt a lot of early adopters who already had cards submitted through CGC early on. So those consistency issues are something that we've seen in the past, and it has me concerned moving forward. Personally, this seems 100 times more problematic to me than that past issue of inconsistency. Now there's a $5 reholder fee that you can pay, and that's a reasonable fee, I think, for reholdering a card, but it's the message that it sends, is if you pay us $5, you can instantly get a better grade and move from a 9.5 up to a 10. And to me, that's just a really dangerous precedent and a dangerous message to send to people, is you can pay to play. You can pay to have that upgrade in an already existing graded card. Also, I think this introduces the issue of saturation onto the market. Could we see a flood of newly upgraded 9.5s hitting the market as 10s, all in a relatively short time span? I think we could. Could it also destabilize existing CGC 10s through the sudden shift in availability and prestige no longer being associated with those older, more difficult to come across ones? Again, I think that's also an entire possibility. To me, this just feels like a desperate Hail Mary pass, a cash grab for early liquidity, and it's something that I'd be very hesitant to endorse, and frankly, I'm quite surprised CGC was willing to go down this route, especially given the past precedent of some other grading companies exploring ideas like this. In fact, we already saw BGS try and fail to implement a similar change in early 2023. This proposal originally came about on March 31st, and BGS management introduced 4 tiers of BGS 10 based on subgrades. At the peak of the mountain, up at the pinnacle, was the Black Label 10, which is a very well-established and reputable grade amongst collectors. Just below that was the Gold Label 10, and then 2 different tiers of Gem Mint 10 based on subgrades as well. And to just add on to that, there's also a Mint Plus above their Mint 9 grade. Now, this was met with massive backlash. Previous 9.5s could potentially become 10s under this new system, and there was so much opposition that BGS actually retracted this proposal on April 3rd, just a few days later, scrapping it entirely. Finally, I wanted to close this off by talking about PSA and what they've been doing throughout all this market turmoil since the post-pandemic boom. Now, after the backlog of 2020 to 2021, PSA made a massive investment into their infrastructure, and I know they opened some new facilities and hired quite a few more staff members, drastically reducing their turnaround times, which has been nice to see. Now, that's not a big achievement considering how terrible, how abysmal those turnaround times were during the backlog, but I will say in a lot of cases, cards are actually returning faster than the estimated times on their website. I can't think of a time recently where that's been true, besides just the last few months. They also introduced new service tiers back in January, simplifying and consolidating the number of options. I believe right now there are 8 different options, and they're still a bit expensive, but they are drastically lower in prices and times than they were immediately following that backlog. So that's nice to see. They've also introduced a new bulk pricing tier for club members specifically, and I believe this was added in April, and I suspect that it's due to the competition in the market and the lower than expected volume seen across all grading services. So it's a competitive offering that they've put out there to people. I guess what it comes down to is, in my mind, PSA is doing everything right. They're improving service times, lowering prices, hopefully lowering prices more in the future as that competition continues to become more fierce. And although it's not flashy or extravagant, I think these are the types of changes that the market is after. Obviously, though, I am biased. I'm a PSA collector myself and a bit of a PSA purist, but you guys will have to let me know what you think down in the comments below about CGC, BGS, PSA, graded cards in general, any of that. The market is in a very strange place right now. I think there's really no denying that. And as we see lower volume of cards submitted to grading companies, an increased level of competition between those companies trying to isolate and carve out their own market share, I think naturally we're going to see some strategic maneuvering, much like we're seeing from CGC in this recent announcement. Again, you guys will have to let me know what you think about CGC's announcement, if this is something you're excited about, how you feel about the blue label versus the new, more generic white and black label. Personally, I like them both. I do like the new one a little bit more. Just me. But anyway, guys, that's all I've got for you in this one. I'm Pokemon Classics, reminding you that the classics never go out of style. Till then, everybody, stay well, enjoy collecting, and don't forget to have fun. That's what we're here for. Bye, everybody.